So, what are we talking about when we talk about church? Well, what I'm talking about is simple church, sort of the elemental church. When we look in the New Testament, we see the word church used three major ways. One is sort of the universal church, all Christians in all places at all times. One is the city or regional church. And a lot of the ideas we have about what church is supposed to look like comes from this city or regional church. But it's also used in the sense of just a few people gathered in a home, church meeting in so-and-so's home. And when we talk about a simple church, that is pretty much what we're referring to. So I like to think of that as a spiritual family, and this spiritual family has Jesus in their midst as king. So, believe it or not, this is a crown, and of course this fish symbol represents Christ. So we're talking about a spiritual family with Jesus in their midst as king, and they focus on three things: loving God, loving others, and making disciples. Those are the three things they focus on. Why these three things? Well, when Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Of course, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. And he said the second commandment is like it: love others as yourself. And he said, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. So essentially, he's saying these two commands, in and of themselves, summarize all God's will as revealed in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, just before Jesus was taken back into heaven, he gave his followers a final command. And that command was make disciples. And then he explained what he means by that. He says, teaching or baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. So, making disciples includes teaching people to obey all of Christ's commands. So it's, in a sense, a summary of all New Testament truth and revelation and commands. So making disciples is the summary of the New Testament. Loving God and loving others, a summary of all the Old Testament commands. So if we are focused on those things, we will be church. We will be about his business. We will be emissaries of the kingdom. And it's important to notice that this is making disciples who make disciples, because one of the commands that he's just given them is to make disciples. So we're loving God, loving others, and making disciples who make disciples. And that is simple church. That is the church in the home type of church. Something that's a little counterintuitive about making disciples who make disciples and then starting these simple churches that start other simple churches is that really the best way to do it is for everyone to be engaged with two of these churches at a time. One is their primary spiritual home, their spiritual family. And so this triangle right here represents that primary spiritual family. And so in this one, you notice it's a pretty small one. It's got three couples in it, represented by the circles, the checks, and the asterisks. So these people, this is their primary spiritual family. But at all times, the expectation, the intention, is for them to also be engaged in helping launch new spiritual communities like this. So here, you'll notice they're outside this simple church. They're helping it to launch. And so if you look back at the training cycle video you'll remember the first two stages of the training cycle are model and assist. So that's what they're doing when they're right here outside this group. They're modeling and assisting for this group. Similarly, these check marks are doing the same thing, initiating this new simple community, and the asterisks are doing the same thing here. But they're not inside because they're not really part of that group. They're coaching people in this group through this process, but they're not part of the group. And then once that coaching aspect is done, the initial concepts are understood, then they will phase out from relating to that group. And instead, they'll start doing the same thing again. And then this group is in the watch phase. So they're watching this group and they're modeling and assisting for this group again. And then after they have modeled and assisted for that group, they'll phase out and just start watching that group. And then they'll do the same thing again. Okay? So this concept of being part of two churches at a time is sort of counterintuitive for most people. But you're constantly in your primary spiritual family and you're modeling and assisting a new group to get started. And then you're keeping some contact with groups that you've done this with before, just watching to make sure they continue to gain the skills and apply things in a way that's healthy and is reproducing.